Hotep, welcome. Good to have you here today as we begin to talk about matters of diversity with regards to International Day with Disabilities. I hope you all are having a great day, and I'm glad to have you as part of our audience today. So as to get started, we're going to be talking today about International Day of Disabled Persons, which is tomorrow on December 3rd. The annual observance of International Day of Disabled Persons was proclaimed in 1992 by the United Nations General Assembly in Resolution 47.3. It aims to promote the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities in all spheres of society and development, and to increase awareness of the situation of persons with disabilities in every aspect of political, social, economic, and cultural life. Today, I have some phenomenal individuals from the University of Central Florida who have come to kind of communicate with me about this particular day and what it means and how we at UCF are really celebrating and owning those who are experiencing disability on our campus. Our first guest is Dr. Adam Meyer. He is the Director of Student Accessibility Services Office and Inclusive Education Services at the University of Central Florida with past experiences at Eastern Michigan University and the St. Louis University. Adam was part of a now completed national U.S. Department of Education grant that explored ways in which concepts of social justice could be more regularly and routinely incorporated into the operations of disability services offices. Adam served on Association for Higher Education and Disability, AHED, Board of Directors, and now serves on the AHED External Review Team for Campus Program Evaluation. He was presented at the past 10 award conferences. He has presented at the last 10 AHED conferences on a variety of disability office and leadership topics. Next, we have Katherine Torres, and she is a facilities scheduler at UCF Recreation and Wellness Center. She has been working in this role since June of 2017. She graduated from UCF in 2016 with her Bachelor's of Science in Health Sciences Administration. While in undergrad, Katherine was awarded the 2015 UCF Student Diversity and Inclusion Impact Award from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Katherine has always had a passion for diversity and inclusion and advocating for the disabled community. So she decided to continue her education and is currently getting her master's degree in interdisciplinary studies, concentrating in diversity and inclusion, and is expected to graduate in spring of 2021. Next, my guest is Taylor Duffy, who is a recent graduate of UCF, earning his bachelor's degree in health sciences this past spring. As an undergrad, Taylor served as the founding president of Nice Exemplar, and the organization supporting UCF's Knights possessing intellectual disabilities. During this time, Taylor was also employed as a resource facilitator for UCF's Inclusion Education Services, where he provided professional and academic support to those with intellectual disabilities. His efforts on campus were recognized during UCF's Diversity Week kickoff, where he received the 2020 Student Diversity and Inclusion Impact Award. In September, Taylor was appointed by Mayor Jerry Demings and the Board of County Commissioners to serve on the county's Disability Advisory Board and extend his passion for inclusivity to all of Orange County. And last but not least, we have Adriana Rodriguez, who is a technical communication student that focuses on accessibility for the intersectional perspective. Currently, she sits on the UCF President Student Advisory Council as a representative for Student Accessibility Services Program. Combining her perspective of accessibility and enthusiasm for the environment, she is a federal intern for the U.S. Forest Services, assisting in implementation of an accessible grant tracking process for both full-time staff and nonprofit partners. Please welcome my guests for today. And I guess my first question to you all is, how you all doing? How's everything going right now?
Doing good. It's been colder in Central Florida, so
yeah, especially. I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah.
Dr. Meyer, how are you?
Doing all right. Yeah, I'm actually enjoying the cold weather. So I'm, yeah, from up north. So this is my time of year.
Definitely. And Adriana?
Same. It's been cold, so I've been enjoying it. It's been a nice change from the heat.
And Katherine?
Same. I love the cold weather, so I'm super excited for the little bit of cold that we get here in Orlando.
How did you get to Florida? All these people loving the cold. How did you get to Florida? I grew up in Connecticut, and I do not have any aspirations of going back. And so this cold weather hit me like it hit me really well today. I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what is this? And so today we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be on this campus and servicing and working with people who are living and dealing with disabilities. And so maybe Dr. Meyer, start off, tell us a little bit about what you do and how you're helping the university community move forward.
Sure, thanks. Well, I have the pleasure of working in student accessibility services and inclusive education services, as you mentioned, and part of a team of between both of those units, probably about 40 or 50 people or so, doing different aspects to really focus on how we make UCF as a campus, as a community, from a physical standpoint, a digital, electronic standpoint, and also just from an attitude standpoint, how we make our campus more accessible, more inclusive, and more embracing of individuals with disabilities. So we do that, and I think a lot of people know about our office through the more traditional focus of accommodations, things like extra time for exams, different technology, et cetera. And that is certainly part of what we do, but we don't feel that's core to our mission. Our mission is really about creating awareness and making changes within our environment to let and allow this place to be more accessible. I'm sure we'll have time to talk more about that during this hour and what that means exactly.
Thanks. And Katherine, you graduated and you came back, and you're moving towards your aspirations in diversity and inclusion. So what's your life like here at UCF and what you're doing?
So I did my undergrad at UCF from 2012 to 2016. During my time, I actually got hired at the Rec and Wellness Center. I had 2 positions there, and my passions for diversity and inclusion honestly sparked when I got my job at the Rec Center. I worked as a program assistant for our adaptive and inclusive rec program area. And that was when I kind of realized, like, I enjoy what I'm doing with Health Services Administration. I enjoy what I'm learning, but I know my true passion is in assisting people with disabilities as someone who has a physical disability and uses a wheelchair. It's always been my goal to show people that, regardless of our situations, we're able to do anything and everything, regardless of what society says about us or whatever barrier.
Put in front of you, right.
So I don't know. I just hope that to use that now within my master's program, like I mentioned in my bio, I do finish next semester. So I'm hoping to kind of move forward with that.
Well, excellent. Congratulations to you. Has COVID and this working remotely been problematic in terms of your degree attainment?
Not necessarily. I think being able to have the access and the ability to, access my courses online. I thankfully haven't had any issues with that so far. But with COVID being the big issue in today's world, I'm grateful that courses are offered online because I don't think I would feel comfortable enough being in the classroom setting right now.
Understood. Adriana, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty good, thanks. So your experiences here in terms of UCF and the work that you're doing, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So right now I am on the President's Council representing student accessibility services and bringing to light, and especially directly to the president of UCF, some circumstances and situations that directly affect disabled students at UCF. And my work with disability and accessibility at UCF didn't really begin until this semester. My disability justice sort of began in a nonprofit setting because my passion really lies in an intersectional way. I'm really passionate about like climate action, justice, and in those spaces, accessibility isn't always thought about. So bringing that perspective to UCF and saying, well, when someone's taking an online class, are you thinking about X, Y, and Z? So like Dr. Meyer brought up to me, especially like our classes being transcribed, our transcriptions available at all times, our videos having warnings if they are going to trigger someone that has a seizure, are all accesses and all like forms of accessibility thought of? Usually not.
Right.
I think people believe that disability is a very like a monolith way of viewing disability. I feel like I'm like giving a word salad right now,
Yeah.
but I think there's like a one view of disability, and oftentimes when accessibility is being presented, it's not by a disabled person. So as a
Right.
disabled person myself, I bring a perspective that maybe another person is able to give, but they're not disabled. And I think like the larger reason why that happens is because academia is not always accessible to disabled people. So there's like a cap that we reach. And it's like all these positions are available, but they're not disabled people at this moment. Not
Right.
always. So
Definitely. Powerful. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Taylor, I got to know you when you were awarded the award through ODI this year, and I was impressed with you the minute I got to know who you were. So talk about what you do and how you started this this organization here at UCF.
Of course. Well, first off, I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Butler, and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for having me on today. I'm excited for a productive discussion with some amazing leaders here at UCF. I wanted to start with, my connection with those with disabilities started at an early age. I have multiple family members with developmental disabilities. And so I recognize from an early age that they often are faced with many challenges and lack of accessibility. And as I entered college and developed as a leader, I really did everything I could to, promote that accessibility and inclusion, because I realized how talented and capable those with disabilities are. Right. This is an amazing day that recognizes over 1 billion people in the world that are affected with a disability. And so once again, I'm really excited. You mentioned my organization that I was able to spearhead along with an amazing team at UCF, along with the support of inclusive education services, student accessibility services, leaders like Dr. Meyer. This was an organization where we saw that while students on campus with intellectual disabilities were receiving great support, great academic support, there was more we could do to involve them on campus and to not only support them, but support inclusivity and diversity for all of our degree-seeking students and those without intellectual disabilities. So Knights Exemplar was a nonprofit organization that ultimately created a mentorship between these individuals, where we had mentors, trained mentors, serve as the intermediary between UCF's resources and the students to make the most out of their experience at UCF. And I think we did that, creating a more inclusive space at UCF. And I'm really proud of the steps we've taken as Knights to advocate for diversity and inclusion.
One of the great things about UCF is that they recognize when students are doing powerful work, and all three of you have done some really phenomenal things to kind of move the needle with regards to that. And Dr. Meyer, you always set me straight. I mean, from the time that we met, I can go to you and I can ask you a question. I can be ignorant about something for a minute, and then you'll share how to kind of move forward and move past that. And so what's it like working at a university with people who maybe don't take the time out to recognize that there are people who need to have been thought of, or at least their attention maybe focused on at times? What's it like to be the leader of someone who is trying to help create a community where we do better?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think at some level, a campus is a microcosm, right, of society at large, and certainly a reflection of our country. And I don't know if there's anything different here than elsewhere, but I also think there's a lot of really great things happening on our campus, and I want to make sure and we take some time to recognize that today as well. I know our goal within SAS is we want to fully envision, or we envision that UCF is a fully accessible and inclusive experience in campus for individuals with disabilities. And we have a long way to go, but in order to make that happen, SAS can do it by ourselves, our team. It's not on us, and it's not on our shoulders to make that happen. And it takes the work of, as you said, Dr. Butler, the work of these students who are here today, who are moving forward and taking action in their own ways. It takes the initiative of different departments and units. I think the Rec and Wellness Center is a great example of that they have accessibility and inclusion in mind and throughout all the facets of what they do within their operation. And so we're not there, right? We're not in the meetings that they're having. We're not in the planning of events and programs and sporting activities or whatever, but they are, and they're keeping those things in mind. And we appreciate that. And we need that to move forward. So a lot of our focus is about how can we empower people to be aware, to understand what they need to be doing and what they can be doing within their own spheres of influence. And it's a challenge, but I like it. We talk about how disability really intersects every facet of the campus community, the classroom, obviously, but facilities, programming, everything, digital communications, whatever it is. And so it's exciting to be able to talk to people and kind of figure out how we can make things more accessible, which I would add, I believe truly also doesn't just benefit disabled students, disabled staff, disabled faculty, but I think the more inclusive we are, it benefits all people. And I think a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons find advantages when we have inclusive environments.
Yeah. So, Taylor, you talked a little bit about having family members and people who are in your life that kind of brought you to that awareness, right? And so for many people, we don't have that awareness, right? We may not have had that perspective or had someone that have come into our lives that made us think about that. And so a lot of times, unless people are affected by something, do they become cognizant of it and do something about it. So for all of you all, what would you want people who are not experiencing disabilities to kind of be mindful of in terms of how they see the world or how they see our campus moving forward? And anyone can answer it.
Of course. I mean, I'll definitely amplify what Dr. Meyer stated, which is, I really believe that diversity in our communities diversify our thought processes, right? And make us better people and a more accessible population. So I just think for others that may not be directly affected, whether that be themselves or a family member, for them just to realize that, once again, 1 billion people in the world have a disability. Many times they're invisible, and that we must just practice care and understanding when working with everyone. Right? We all have our challenges, and anything we can do to be more accessible, to be more informed is really important as people. And, I believe it's a civic duty, right? As my position on the Orange County Disability Advisory Board, we very much believe that it is a civic duty of all of us to be informed and create an accessible culture for everyone. Because, while I may not have a disability, many disabilities are acquired. A large percentage of those of advanced age have a disability. So we must be those advocates now, so we also have those advocates for ourselves in the future or in the now.
Right. Katherine, I see you shaking your head. What's going on over there?
No, I mean, everything Taylor said is pretty much spot on, but something I would like to add is being open to having those types of conversations with people. I don't know why people seem to be intimidated when they approach us or they're around someone who has a disability. They just kind of forget how to act and freak out. And honestly, if you just treat people like people, then you can learn so much from someone. And I think having conversations and being open to having conversations, I'm going to give my department a quick shout out, RWC. Everyone there has been so open and so willing to have conversations with me. And it's okay to be ignorant. I mean, I think we all have a little bit of ignorance in us. But it's not until we have these conversations to really understand someone and understand their needs and actually listen and try to do your part, then I think those fears kind of go away. But I honestly think that having conversations and also understanding that everyone's story is completely different. Regardless if you have the same disability, everyone's experiences, everyone's, life is just completely different from one another. So instead of comparing everyone in that same circle, like, oh, I know someone that has cerebral palsy, they experience X, Y, and Z, doesn't mean that that same person with that same disability is going to experience the same thing. So, and I think as people with disabilities, it's our duty to be open in having these conversations and sharing our stories.
And as you shared, you said you were in a wheelchair, and I think when people approach you or when people see you for the very first time, they get nervous or they get tie-tongue or something in terms of having a conversation with you. What would be something that you want to say to those people? I mean, I know it's not your responsibility to put them in the straight pathway, but what is the expectation that you may have that people really could kind of come to you without having all this trepidation or fear?
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like just even if people want to like do lunch or something, I know granted with COVID, we can't really do that right now. But if anyone wants to like be like, hey, I really want to hang out with you sometime, let's grab coffee or let's go for a walk around campus. And then just saying like, what's your story? And I think using that terminology makes it more personable, right? I've had people come up to me and be like, so what happened? I'm like, I don't know. Like, what do you mean?
Happening outside? What's going on? Is it raining? Right.
Yeah, like something happened. I didn't check the news this morning. I don't know.
You brought up a really good point, because when you think about it, when your normal life is your normal life. And so when somebody comes up out of the blue and says something because they perceive you to be a certain way, it just takes away your humanity in that regards, because it's not looking at you as a person who has any other thing other than your disability, which, that is not the whole of who you are and intersectionalities in which you embrace. So I appreciate you sharing that. And so let me bring Adriana into here and see what's going on with you in terms of how people kind of reach out to you when they first meet you.
It's really a mixed bag. I think people can kind of go the route of like, oh, like poor you, like you're too this to be that, like, or I think people have like, again, how I mentioned earlier, this view of like, if you're disabled, you are then this, like you cannot be like in college, you cannot be this, or like everyone around you must be a saint because they're putting up with you. And it's like, have you met people? Like they're not saints. Like, I don't know. And especially on college campuses, like people just like, if you are like presenting as abled, they don't hold the door open for you. And like oftentimes I do need a wheelchair. So like, I don't know, they'll be like, so you're faking? And it's like, no, I'm not, but I don't owe you an explanation. Like, that's just not how it works.
That's not how it
So
works.
I think like definitely like what she said, it's like people oftentimes feel like they are deserving of more than like they actually need. But it goes back to that like kind of tearing down those stigmas and the taboo of like disability is something anyone can acquire. It's like the one marginalized group that anyone could like belong to at any point in their life. And like it's not specifically for the elderly, but like it could just happen at any moment. And it's not taxing, but it is just like, okay, like come on now. Like illness and sickness is not like something that you will never get. Like you've had a cold before, but it's not a cold. So like,
Right.
why are you afraid of us? Or like the worst is when someone will be like, oh yeah, I've had a cold. And it's like, this isn't a cold. It's not going away.
Right.
Like, this is my life. So like treat it with respect because I'm a human. But if you want to ask questions, like ask them respectfully.
So Dr. Meyer, what are some of the things that come up for people who have invisible or disabilities, and and people just don't know about? Are those some of the things that you're dealing with? And in some ways, how do they kind of present themselves in those circumstances?
Well, I'll answer that, but I kind of want to go back to the points that Katherine and Adriana just made, and even really tied into Taylor too. So I think an underlying thing here is that, and we've had a lot of conversations on campus, right, and nationally in our country about racism, right, and much needed, necessary conversations and things that we need to absolutely be exploring. I would say that one of the things that does not get anywhere near the focus that it should, even on our campus, but nationally as well, is the idea of ableism. And I think that's what we're hearing here in the comments from these other folks, is that this idea of ableism is that non-disabled people are better than, more capable than, greater than individuals with disabilities, right? And so much of how our society has been built and designed is with ableism, or with an ableist mindset. And so, for example, we think about physically is probably the easiest one just off the cuff to think about, but stairs, right, is a very common thing in our society to get into buildings, get into houses, even whatever the case may be. But we're assuming that people have a certain ability, that you can walk, you're on two legs, you can take steps, et cetera. But we know not everybody can do that. But we design it with the majority in mind. And on TV, for example, captions aren't an obvious thing, or always a determined thing, or a guaranteed thing, I guess. But again, we're assuming that people can see and can hear information, but we know not everybody can do that. And that's just unfortunately how our society functions. So a lot of times when non-disabled individuals encounter somebody with a disability, what I believe happens, and I'm kind of tying it back to your question about invisible disability, is that unconsciously, unintentionally, we start thinking about they're less than, the disability is negative, the disability is bad, there's a problem with the person. Right. And that's really what we need to shift our thinking around. And I think people with invisible disabilities, learning disabilities, ADHD, chronic health conditions, we know in talking with students, and I'll kind of tie this back to the academic world, but I think this goes to other worlds as well too. And I heard this a little bit in Adriana's comments, that they have to think about whether or not they want to disclose that I have a learning disability, or I have a chronic health condition or whatever, because people have all had experiences where upon disclosing that, they feel the other individual sees them in a different light, not necessarily in a better light, right? And that's really where the struggle then ensues. And should I be sharing this? Do I not share this because I don't necessarily want to be seen differently? And it weighs on people over the course of the day and their various interactions that they have.
Yeah, I can imagine that, especially when it comes to your grades, right? And instructors now treating you differently because of the fact that you have a disability, or you have disclosed a disability, and then while there may be support that they can provide for you, not being overly trying to help and support and things beyond what you would do for any other student, you bring more issue. You put more light on to something that most likely doesn't have to have that light on it if you just treat the person as a human being, right? Mm-hmm. In the very first place. So same thing that was going on with you with the students that you were working with, Taylor?
Yeah, I think Adriana and Dr. Meyer touched on kind of the stigma, right, that comes with those that may have a disability. And while we understand that, that doesn't affect their capabilities as long as they are, utilizing the resources and having the accessibility there. One thing that I've experienced regarding stigma is, as someone without a disability, I often spend a lot of time through my work and through my personal life with my friends that may have a disability. And many people come to me and they look at me as this advocate, this ally, this person that's, dedicating their time. And I'm looking at some of these friends of mine, colleagues, I'm saying, these are my friends. You know, they're just like you and I. And, you know, I think that stigma is something I do experience, you know, working professionally within this field. People sometimes think that, you know, you're very selfless, and it really isn't that, right? We just recognize the lack of accessibility, and we want to improve that. But I mean, you know, these people are just like, you know, you and I, Dr. Butler. And I think that is a stigma that I see that I think is unfair for everyone involved, and wanted to bring that up.
And I love the fact that you all keep bringing up the fact that it's, even those with invisible disabilities don't recognize it. Sometimes we don't even pay attention to it, because I wear glasses, right? I'm wearing contacts right now. And so I have a disability because I really cannot see very far without them being on. And so when I think about it, I don't necessarily utilize it as a crutch or something along those lines. But at the same time, if I could start thinking of my life as having disabilities as well, I might see others who have disability in a much better light, because now I'm starting to really put some humanism behind it, right? I'm starting to recognize that, wow, while I have some things I have to deal with, there are other people who have things that they have to deal with as well. Don't have to make it a special case. I have to tell you that I often have trouble when I'm at an event, say I'm at a sporting event or something, and then they bring someone out that does something like in a wheelchair, they do the Olympics, or they do something where they're playing basketball or they're doing something, and everybody in the crowd just marvels it and just goes crazy as if they've done something special. And I'm like, they've done something special because they, just like any other person who learned how to play basketball, play basketball. And so sometimes I think that we overcompensate for someone who has a disability because we are embarrassed, or we don't know what to do or what to say about it. And I wonder what you all think about that. And I'm just thinking off the cuff when I'm saying that, but you know, you're human beings, and you have a right to be able to do things. I hear that, Katherine, I hear you scale the rock wall and things along those lines. So people should not say, wow, because she's in a wheelchair, she can't do those things. And I wonder how you feel about that when people kind of overpraise you for something that you know that you can do.
I think it's a matter of, it's not something that is typically seen, which is why people become so shocked and amazed by it. For someone who lives it, this is your everyday life. And so, you know, just kind of giving an academic example, for me, getting my master's degree is just getting a master's degree. I'm just continuing my education. But when people hear that I'm in a grad program and I'm going for my master's degree, it's like, oh my God, like it's the greatest thing they ever heard. And I'm like, okay, like, of course it's a big deal, but I think because I'm in a wheelchair and because I have a disability, people, I guess, have these like subconscious ideas that people with disabilities can't continue their education. Right. So, I mean, I think it's also why we constantly hear in different topics of diversity how representation matters. And I think representation matters when it comes to ability and disability a lot. And unfortunately, it's not something we see in our everyday lives. Just because, I don't know, Coca-Cola or whatever puts a commercial and they include a couple disabled people, it's like the greatest commercial on TV at that moment. But in all over the world, for example, Paralympic sports are seen on their national television. In the United States, we don't see the Paralympic sports. You have to stream it on YouTube or on some other website. So we even had an international student one year that interned with us, and he had never seen an able-bodied basketball game before, because where he grew up, all he knew was wheelchair basketball. Right. His city or his country had a national wheelchair basketball team, and they aired it on television all the time. So that was his normal, right? So when he came here, his supervisor took him to one of the UCF basketball games, and he's like, whoa, this was like foreign to him. Right. You know, and I think that's why representation is so important, especially in the disabled community as well.
Yeah, I like the word that you use, normalizing, right? You normalize it for everyone, that this is what's here. This is who we are as a people. This is what we all have to deal with. and maybe you don't have to deal with this or suffer from this or deal with that or love this or do that. But that doesn't mean that other people aren't going through that. So respect and show some grace to people who just have a different way of living than you do, right? So Taylor, you've graduated now and you're working for the state of Florida, I guess, or the city of Orlando anyway. What has that transition been like for you to kind of go to be away from UCF a little bit?
Of course. Well, it's first off been an amazing and humbling experience, right? At UCF, I primarily work with students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, right? But as we've already discussed today, right, that's only part of the spectrum of those with disabilities. And you know, working with constituents of Orange County, once again, I've learned so much that I didn't even know existed myself. So first off, it's a learning process, right? I think for all of us, it's a lifelong learning process. But I have seen how much we have been doing as a county for those with disabilities, but the challenge is ahead. I mean, during COVID-19, you know, I think we all recognize that this creates extreme challenges for many of those with disabilities. Katherine, you talked about representation. With virtual learning and many other virtual endeavors, representation becomes harder for certain individuals. Emerging technologies that may be suited for those that are able in those circumstances may not create the representation or the accessibility we need. So really learning that with COVID-19, this poses many challenges for all of us, but especially those with disabilities. So I think that's something I would love to discuss today as well. Dr. Meyer, how has COVID-19 changed the way the office has been working, and what type of challenges have you seen your students facing?
Yeah, and I think for us, and we're still feeling our way through that, but COVID has had impacts, both positive and negative, I guess, in terms of accessibility, right? So our campus has taken some steps in terms of how do we create greater access for all students who need to take classes during this time, right? And so some of the strategies that have been implemented, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, maybe not targeted at people or students with disabilities, but benefits individuals with disabilities as well. I think one of the areas where we are seeing many more barriers is within our deaf and hard of hearing population on campus, because more classes are online, professors are using more videos, but then those videos don't have the appropriate captions. And so, for instance, one of the data points that really fascinates me is last fall semester, we had to caption 5,500 minutes worth of videos for classes that were taking place in the fall semester for our deaf and hard of hearing students. And this semester, as of November 1st, we were at 38,000 minutes that had to be captioned. So there were that many more videos that really needed, we had to focus on, and that's created quite a strain on our system to be able to manage that. So, but it's all been case by case. And for us, it's more about how does the environment shift and change, and where does that shift create greater access? And then where does that shift potentially create greater barriers where we need to ensure that equal access exists?
That's nice. So, Dr. Meyer, when you think about the role that you serve here at UCF, what do you want the university community to know about what you present and what you provide, especially for like maybe faculty members and staff members who are dealing with individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, so I think, first and foremost, our big message that we really want to get across, and I heard a lot in Katherine's comments a few minutes ago, that I think we just don't realize how deeply rooted this idea of ableism is within our culture. You talked earlier about people, you mentioned that at a sporting event or something and seeing people with disabilities doing some certain game or activity and the crowd going wild or whatever. But that really falls in line with that whole idea of ableism. And we see people with disabilities being helpless. We pity them. Again, we feel that they're not very capable. And Katherine spoke to that really nicely. And so I think first and foremost, how do we break that barrier alone? And that we are all people, right? We're all coming from the same spot. We all have dreams, we all have goals, and we all want to succeed and be successful. And so, you know, that's our first thing. And then within that, to not look at it as the person being the problem when encountering, say, a disabled student in the classroom or at an event or something, but the environment is probably the problem, whether it's the attitudes, the lack of captioning, whether it's the way a certain test is designed, a certain activity, and how can we reasonably address that or switch that. And so we have a lot of thoughts on our end about how classes can be designed with more access in mind, such that if you did that, then there would be a few or lesser need for accommodations, right? Accommodations is not the end goal. The end goal needs to be making an environment that's fully accessible from the outset.
Nice, nice. So one of the statistics that I came across says that 1 in every 5 women in their lifetime are likely to experience having a disability. And then the other part of it is that while 1 in every 10 children is a child with a disability. What are your thoughts that come up for you when you hear that type of a statistic? And maybe how is that necessarily represented here at UCF? Do you see those numbers kind of being, I guess, similar to what we as our little microcosm of the world are experiencing as well?
Yeah, and I'll let if others want to jump in, but I can start with that. You know, and I think I can't remember if it was Katherine or Adriana said first, but disability intersects every, you know, no matter who you are, no matter what race, I mean, gender, whatever, disability, anybody can become disabled at any point. I mean, we just know that exists. We know on a campus, within a campus community, national averages suggest that about 10 to 12% of the campus will identify as a disabled student. So, you know, I don't know the exact numbers here at UCF. I can tell you that about 3.5% of the students on our campus connect with SAS, but we know that there are many, many more students with disabilities who have not connected with our office, and there's a variety of reasons for that.
Right.
You know, but it exists. It's just we got to think it's not about the individual. It's more about, again, how to make the environment more accessible to accommodate or to recognize that disability is ever present.
Yeah. So Katherine and Adriana, when you got here to campus, did you find it to be accessible for you in the ways that you needed it to be? And if not, what were some of the things that you were hoping for change, or maybe hoping that will still change now that you're here?
I can go first. For me, it was pretty accessible. I mean, I feel like, again, every person has their own individual needs. It's disability. The word disability is just a big umbrella, and then you have thousands of raindrops falling, and those little raindrops represent every individual person and their own individual needs and their own condition. So I think, for me personally, when I did my undergrad, I was, you know, surprised and happy with how accessible it was, how, you know, I'm completely capable of opening a door and doing that kind of stuff by myself. So I didn't really necessarily need to use the actuators that are on the buildings for the doors to open. But I know some people do. So sometimes I would click it just because it's right there. And then I would realize, okay, it's not working. And then you keep clicking it. And then sometimes I would think back like, okay, I know I'm completely capable of opening a door, but if someone who actually needs to use this button comes and tries to use it, they're going to have to wait for someone to come by and rely on someone to open the door for them. And I think, you know, some people probably don't like asking for help. I'm probably one of those people where I know I'm completely capable of doing things, so I rather do a lot of things on my own. Now, if someone offers to help, then sure, go ahead, help me. But I'm not one to kind of initiate that. And I'm sure a lot of people are like that as well. So personally, I didn't have any issues. I'm one of those who did not have to register with Student Accessibility Services when I was an undergrad. So that was—
I would tell you that was one of my biggest pet peeves, and I don't know if I should have that pet peeve, but when I would be walking into a building, I would see a very able-bodied person who I could feel would be able-bodied would, you know, stop and hit that. and wait for it to open and then walk through it, right? And I'm like, now if it breaks for the next person who comes through, when it didn't have to be used that time around, that's just one of my, and I don't even know if I should have that as a pet peeve, but I used to really get annoyed when I would see people using that who for my purposes didn't seem to need it, right? And I guess that's me now having a bias against someone who may have needed it. I just didn't necessarily recognize it as such. So so a change of thinking or reframing that way of thinking. Adriana, how about you?
It's definitely been a process. I believe Dr. Meyer talked a little bit about it, like reframing and shifting what accommodations like mean. So I think with that being said, at first it really wasn't what I was expecting, just because oftentimes when you hand the accommodations to a professor, they give you like a contract back in order to like accept your accommodations, and it makes it a lot more difficult to like actually implement the accommodations, because oftentimes like they view it as like, oh, you want to cheat, and it's like, I'm just showing up to class, like, because like going back to what we've been saying, like it's like a shock if a disabled person wants to go to college apparently. So like if I'm here to go to school, and that's that. So it's like, it's been, a trek. We're here, we're doing it, but I see a lot of like improvements and changes, especially this semester in its entirety has been like a full change. So it's
Nice.
been exciting to see where this is all going. But
Excellent.
yeah, I am registered with SAS, and I know that there's a lot that could come from the office, and if anyone's listening and they're hesitant to at least reach out, they should. So
Excellent. So there's some questions in the chat, or the question in the Q&A. So let me ask this question for you all. What can the RWC do to make the Rec Center and its programs more accessible and inclusive to meeting the needs of all students in the campus community? What would you like to see changed, improved, or enhanced?
Yeah, and I don't know, Adriana, do you have any thoughts on that from a current student perspective?
for the Rec Center,
Yeah.
I would say continuously doing trainings on disability with disabled students. I think, like I've continuously said, I think I think just in general, this is probably like a nationwide issue that people that want to do trainings don't always like include like almost full disabled panels or planning. I don't know how, Katherine, that's where you worked, right? Were you maybe like the only person there that was, if there was training?
So I still currently work there, and
Okay.
ever since 2014 when I started working there, we have created what we call a Serving Students with Disabilities module, and we use that module as our one of our like diversity initiatives, and we go through every single program area to their meetings and do this training just so that way our staff feel more comfortable. Because again, I don't know why there's this whole fear and nervousness that rushes through people's bodies whenever we come through the building, or that whenever they have to interact with someone. So this training at least helps our students feel more comfortable and knowledgeable on the stuff that we offer at the Rec Center, because we do offer so much. I did a whole presentation a couple of weeks ago on everything that the Rec Center does to serve students with disabilities. But I think it all starts internally, which is something we've been working on for the past 6 years or so. I know now with COVID, it's been a little bit difficult, but hopefully we can get those back up and running, because I think starting with our student staff members really helps the experience of students that have disabilities that come into our facility.
Yeah.
And Katherine, I wanted to ask you as a RWC employee, I know when I was a student at UCF, there was the great student assisted workout, or SAW. Is that something that the RWC still offers for students with disabilities? And what about in the scenario in which they're not comfortable potentially going in person? They may have a disability that puts them at a greater risk for COVID-19. Are there any virtual SAW opportunities?
Yeah. So that's something we've been really working on. Again, it's not necessarily my area because my main role at the rec center is doing scheduling. But I know our assistant director for adaptive and inclusive rec is working really hard to try and do kind of those virtual sessions. It's difficult because when you're dealing with students with disabilities, especially if they have a physical limitation, there are certain things that they're unable to do, or they need to be watched really carefully, or else they can hurt themselves. So doing those virtual classes are probably not as intense. I don't want to really use that word, but you know what I mean. Whereas if they were in the facility with someone who's actually there watching them and assisting them on the machines and with the equipment. But yes, we have been doing some virtual offerings.
That's great. And you brought up a great point about how, so many of those with disabilities often require in-person assistance, right? And that's something that's, much more difficult to come by with COVID-19, right? Those in-person services, many require touching things and that manual aspect of life, and with social distancing and everything, that's just, I think, a great point that is kind of brought up here today of we have to be cognizant of the other challenges that many are going through as well. And if we see something a little off, obviously there's you can just ask, you can talk, but be cognizant of the fact that this may be something that must be done given the circumstances.
Yeah, I had a personal trainer through RWC, and when we went to remote, I took some training online. They were at their home and I was at mine, and we were going back and forth. It's just having the equipment. It's not like having the same as having a spotter there if something goes wrong, but it was something that was offered. I'm wondering if that is something that those who have disabilities may be able to utilize as well. So there's another question that's in the Q&A, and it says, as we look to become more inclusive, sometimes that means becoming inherently exclusive. What is some advice you would give departments to offer programming directed specifically towards groups of people?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand the intent of that question, because I think it could go a couple different directions, and I don't want to speak for all, I guess, other groups of people. I will say from a disabled student perspective, we actually really try to help departments like, let's say, academic advising, for instance, or other areas understand that the processes that they're using probably are the best processes, and just asking the right questions that they would ask to any student is whether you're a non-disabled student or a disabled student, you're going to get helpful information to help you make informed decisions on how you need to direct that student from an advising perspective. So we actually, to us, is not about how do you ask questions differently if you realize that you're working with a student with a disability, but how do you just take whatever your philosophy or whatever your approach is, and how do you just use that no matter who you're working with? And so that's at least what we do, but I know that may not be quite in line with that question, but again, I'm only speaking for—
And it's not like what you do is without making assumptions, you just go and do the work. And then if something needs to be corrected, it will be kind of corrected throughout the natural course of things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise I think you do run the risk of, if you have a disabled student who comes into your office, put away your normal game plan book and now bring out this special game plan book, right? And that's not what we want, because I think that creates an experience that's different from everyone else, and now we're perceiving the person to be different, and so that's what we're really trying to avoid.
Yeah, and that's a diversity and inclusion thing right there, right? That's one of the things that we try to teach people, is that you meet people where they are. You go in, and each person can't be, you can't read a book and then throw it at a person who walks into your office. You have to meet them and treat them as the human that they are, the individual that they are, right?
Sure.
And go from that perspective, right? Katherine, you look like you were going to say something.
I just think that kind of what Adam was saying, you go with the flow of things. And that's where that learning piece comes into play, where if you realize, oh, we just need to make a couple adaptations or something, because simply, honestly, it's not hard to make things accessible. You honestly just have to make a few changes here and there. You just have to be willing to make those changes. And again, having those conversations with people and actually listening and actually doing something about it. Because I could tell my story to people every day, all day long. I can tell them what I need, but if they don't actually take action and listen to what I'm saying and do something about it, then, we're just going to be on page one the whole time. Like, we're not going to be able to move forward.
Right.
So I think.
So there's a clarification, and then I want to get to this last question. I know that we're at the hour. It says, to clarify, I'll offer an example. If my department is running a program specifically for students with different abilities, I could be leaving out other students who might benefit from the program. Does that make sense? So how do you make it inclusive? So I think that one of the things that I can say that I know even from our office is that we open up all our programming to everyone. Now, while it may be something that looks specific towards one population, it really is open to all. And so, so we have to be very careful not to look at the topic that's being presented as the reason why you're going to a presentation. If it's something that you're interested in, you should go because of the fact that the program is being presented. I hope that makes sense. I see you all nodding your head.
Yeah, I think that was, sorry to interrupt, Dr. Butler. I think that was a good example that the viewer brought about. And I think, my philosophy has always been, my mission has always been, as we strive for a more inclusive environment, a more inclusive community, we're not just looking at those, creating more inclusion for those with a disability. We are very cognizant of everyone else. And the moment that it creates any additional challenges for maybe the more able population in that given circumstance is the moment that we're not achieving our mission or achieving our philosophy. So I think it's something that we think about whenever we try to make an environment more accessible. We think of everyone. That's the whole point of our, or at least my mission, I should say, but I'm sure others may have something to add on that.
I think that was really well said. I think when we talk about accessibility and how Dr. Meyer has been explaining why we're trying to move away from accommodations is because accessibility shouldn't be like feared and viewed as like extra steps and like, oh my gosh, all this work. Because when a disabled person comes to you and says, these are the steps that I'm taking, it's sort of like, okay, you're all entering a room and this is the handle that you're turning to enter the room, but a disabled person maybe needs like some extra steps to get that handle turned. And so when you look at it that way, it's like, okay, obviously I'm not going to leave you out of the room. Let me just help you open that door. Not literally, but like, I think when everyone can sort of see like, okay, obviously that's not equitable. How do we make this experience equitable? And I think sort of how Taylor spoke earlier, we want this to be like a community aid. We want this to be something that we could all participate in. Why wouldn't we want it to be? So sort of shifting our mindset together makes this like a process that we all want to take part in. Nice. So I think when making these programs, the mindset and the intention is always what we need to focus on. And when the intention is off, then taking a break and saying, okay, maybe we need to refocus. That's really important as well. That's what I have to add.
So we're coming up on the end of time, and I really appreciate it. Hours flown in terms of talking with you all. But there's a question I want to throw it out there and then end on this maybe, and maybe you all can think about it in terms of goals for our future. But the question says, what are some goals to be achieved in terms of accessibility that you have for future disabled students? I guess students who are coming to UCF. But what goals do you have in general? I guess I would try to transfer this question out. So maybe if you could give us your last minute thoughts on what would you want to see as our future in order to support students who have disabilities?
Yeah, I can jump in and others feel free. I know we really need to do a lot of work in enhancing our digital accessibility, our electronic accessibility on campus. We're very fortunate that we have recently hired a new WADA coordinator on campus through OIE, who's really spearheading that initiative. And so we're excited to see where that's going to come over the next 12 to 18 months. And there's a lot of layers to that, but we have to do a better job of making all of our digital communication and information accessible to individuals. And then we, in SAS, we really want to continue to work with the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, CDL folks, to just how do we continue to create a more accessible academic experience so that students can feel included from the outset without having the need to always be asking for accommodations. Those are a couple of goals, and we're always looking at facilities, but we're very appreciative of facilities. That's another great entity on campus that is doing a lot of work. They have accessibility in mind, and I know there are a lot of pockets on campus that need to be more accessible, but in the time that I've been here, they've taken great strides, and I really like the progress we're making in that area.
Excellent, excellent.
I think, I'm sorry, Dr. Butler, I jumped the gun. I was just going to say that one of my goals, as well as Orange County, is increasing employment among those with disabilities. And there's a lot of approaches that we need to take to improve in that regard, but it's something that we still struggle with. There are still those stigmas, there's still non-accessible workplaces. And so that's a big goal. And I think conversations like this, the podcast that you've spearheaded, Dr. Butler, really do decrease these misinformed stigmas and really allow us to take steps towards, allowing those with disabilities to become more successful in the workplace. And I think our workplaces will benefit as a result from having this inclusion and this accessibility. So once again, definitely increasing employment among this talented and very able group of individuals.
I agree. I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. It's like, and once you have it in your system, you start to do it more, and it's like riding a bicycle or working out. Even speaking of RWC, as long as you start doing it and thinking about it, you start to incorporate it much more without any real kinks in it. Right? You do it because it's something that becomes natural for you to do. Anything else coming from you or Katherine and Adriana?
I think a goal for me would be just for the campus in general to just have an accepting attitude, and for students with disabilities to come to campus and feel like they're welcome and that they actually belong. It's really difficult when you're the only one who kind of stands out. There used to be a show that said it was about these girls that were in wheelchairs, and they constantly used this little quote that said, "If you can't stand up, stand out." And sometimes standing out isn't always the best thing in certain situations.
I can agree with that.
I think
I can agree with that.
Having an environment that people feel accepted and actually feel welcome being on campus is
excellent. Excellent. Adriana, any last words?
I think my top goal would be like a coalition or an ability for disabled students to be like in communication with one another and speaking directly to like administration and like advocating for themselves first and foremost. I think that's so important. So that's my number one.
Well, thank you. I want to thank all of you, Dr. Meyer, Katherine, Adriana, Taylor. You have been phenomenal. I appreciate you coming and being a part of today. We're a little over, but hopefully those who have been helping support us are not too angry with us. But thank you for your wealth of knowledge and experiences and just letting it be a normal thing, right? Letting us all kind of treat and work with each other and not be afraid. I think that's the biggest thing that I see in most people is they're afraid to kind of just deal with what life has to offer, right? And instead of feeling sorry for doing something along those lines. So I appreciate you all, and if anything I can do for you, don't ever hesitate to kind of reach out. just as a broadcast announcement, on this Friday, we have, in honor of World Soil Day, our guests are going to be from the Arboretum, and I'm saying that wrong. And so our MOD on Friday is going to be with Jennifer Elliott and Dr. Patrick Bowen from the Arboretum. Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Arboretum. Okay, so anyway, I want to thank our sponsors, the Office of the Foundation, UCF Foundation, who kind of support our broadcast, and you all for being here. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank you.